I'd like to welcome you all to our noon forum presented by the Associated Student Speakers Program. This afternoon we welcome as our guest Senator Strom Thurmond. Coming to the Senate in 1954 by virtue of an unprecedented write-in election, Senator Thurmond shocked most of the political world by giving up seniority in the Democratic Party to join the Goldwater Republicans in 1964. He serves on the Powerful Armed Services Committee, and he is a member of the Preparedness Investigation Subcommittee. In 1962, the senator won an investigation by a special Senate subcommittee on military speech censorship and Cold War education activities. He is known for his fight against what he has described the State Department's no-win foreign policy. After Senator Thurmond's address, there'll be a question and answer period in the adjacent men's lounge. And now I'm pleased to present the Honorable Senator Strom Thurmond.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to be here at this great university. I'm very proud to have the opportunity to come to the great state of California and speak again. I was here about 3 years ago and enjoyed my visit here at that time. I realize that everyone in this audience will not agree with what I shall have to say today, but it's every American's right to express his opinion. And I want to commend those who are sponsoring these programs for bringing people here and allowing them to express their opinions, and then you can judge of yourself and form your own opinions. And that's what you should do. In order to save time, I'm going right into my address. I understand a good many of the students will have to leave about 15 minutes before the hour. I have chosen today as a subject for my address, Through the Looking Glass, the Communist World. I am very pleased to have this opportunity to speak here and share with you a few thoughts about what I consider to be the most critical concern of our times. It always gives me the greatest pleasure to present my ideas to students, for I have found that they make the most attentive audiences. As the search for truth goes on, young minds should and must remain receptive to all theories, but above all, they should be able to discern between fact and fancy. Far too many of the theories which form the basis for the foreign policy of the United States are themselves grounded in pure fancy rather than cold, hard fact. In several major respects, the emerging policy of the United States toward the communist world provides a shining example. For instance, everyone agrees that communist China poses a threat to the peace and security of the free world, and it is common knowledge that the gulf between the Soviet Union and Red China is daily becoming more pronounced. What these two sets of circumstances mean in the total context of free world relations with the communist world, however, is a breaking point of agreement. Some fancy that the split between the Soviet Union and Red China portends a general shift in the attitude of the Soviet Union toward the United States and the free world. The equation is not complete, however, because many other factors which bear heavily upon the answer have been conveniently overlooked. In order to place in proper perspective the foreign policy's fancies and facts of the day, let us turn first toward Red China. The events in China today make it incumbent upon the United States to re-examine our policy toward that country. The truth is, the future of China is tied very intimately with the mistakes in our policy toward the Soviet Union and in Southeast Asia, particularly in Vietnam. The United States has consistently ignored the communist regime in Peking and hoped that it would go away. At the same time, we built up the myth that Peking was the greatest threat to world peace. We have argued that Peking threatened peace, not because it was a communist regime, but because it advocated violence. We accepted uncritically the doctrines of Peking's superhuman control over its people and of its vast military potential. These theories have now been exploded by the inner convulsions racking that unhappy nation. The shattering of those uncritical beliefs now have important consequences for the future. In the first place, whatever military potential Red China might have had is now incapacitated. Newspaper reports from China tell not only of political chaos, but of a disruption of China's industrial complex. Even if another communist regime should emerge out of the present chaos, China's ability to mount even limited warfare has been drastically set back. We cannot be sure that luck will strike twice and that an anti-communist government will gain control, as did happen in Indonesia. The present turmoil began primarily as a clash between communist factions with consequences which no one can now predict. This civil war on the mainland of China seems to be the one thing which our own policymakers did not anticipate. They did not think it possible that the Chinese people would ever rise up against the Mao regime. They have prepared no plan of action for this eventuality. They seem to think that it was inevitable that China would remain communist, and even now they have done nothing to encourage the Chinese people in their suffering or to hold out the hope of support should the contending communist factions destroy each other and freedom return to the Chinese mainland. Our policy has been revealed as being without goals, without strategy, without tactics. Much more revealing, however, has been the nakedness of our official assumptions about Red China's role in Vietnam. Time after time, our Secretaries of State and Defense have implied that Peking was the principal power supporting North Vietnam in its war of aggression against South Vietnam. It is now clear that Peking's support of Hanoi has been largely the support offered by a big mouth and small means. Peking's contributions to the war effort in Vietnam have, since the beginning, been limited in both quantity and quality. China does not have the technical or industrial capacity to supply her own needs, much less those of Hanoi and the Viet Cong. In all probability, the volume of even the more primitive weapons being supplied has been drastically reduced or even halted in recent weeks. The real enemy in Vietnam, the real antagonist, has been the Soviet Union. The overwhelming bulk of the sophisticated weaponry used against American soldiers and American airmen in Vietnam has been supplied by the Soviet Union. Soviet MiG aircraft, Soviet built and frequently manned surface-to-air missiles, Soviet radar, and many Soviet-supplied conventional anti-aircraft installations constitute the only air defense of North Vietnam. While American airmen have performed admirably in the air over North Vietnam, the fact that these installations enjoy a virtual sanctuary against destruction has enabled them to exact a terrible toll in American lives and aircraft. In addition to the Soviet-provided protection to the North, in the North, they also provide an early warning system to the Viet Cong in the South against raids by our 52s based on Guam. Virtually since the beginning of B-52 sorties over South Vietnam, the Soviets have had a fishing trawler stationed in the water off the coast of Guam, where they are able to spot our aircraft as they take off. They are then able to radio ahead and warn of another attack, and thereby provide the Viet Cong with some time to deploy into caves and protect their weapons caches to the best of their ability. Soviet trucks and cars transport war material and personnel, and Soviet oil brought in through Haiphong keep the vehicles going. Red China has been unable to solve its own transportation problems, much less contribute substantially to the mobility of the North Vietnamese war machine. Of necessity, any public discussion of Soviet support for the prosecution of the war in Vietnam must be based upon that information which can be gleaned from unclassified sources. Public statements by Soviet leaders themselves is one such source. A year ago, Leonid Brezhnev bragged that the Soviet Union was spending $600 million a year to supply North Vietnam. The level of that support to the war effort in Vietnam has consistently risen to the point that today it is being supplied at a rate of at least $800 million per year. The dollar value of Red Chinese support for the war effort in Vietnam has never equaled that of the Soviet Union, even though, as a United States Senator, I have access to some information not readily available to the general public. Security restrictions are as binding upon me as upon anyone else. However, a recent article which appeared in the U.S. News and World Report summarized very cogently the relative support of the Soviet Union and Red China to the war effort in Vietnam. Let me quote some of their findings. The Russian rockets and guns are directly responsible for mounting U.S. losses over the North. Almost 1,000 surface-to-air missiles have been fired at U.S. planes. These Soviet missiles, launched by Russian trained crews, have themselves destroyed 30 U.S. planes and contributed in a large measure to an overall, all in the North, of more than 460 U.S. planes. Cost to the Russians in spent missiles, about $25 million. Cost to the United States in planes alone, more than $1 billion. The North Vietnamese landscape is also studded with conventional anti-aircraft positions, about 6,000 in all. The original anti-aircraft system was installed by the Chinese. Now bigger guns are coming in. They are Russian. The North Vietnamese Air Force now consists of 75 to 100 fighter planes and a handful of light bombers supplied by the Soviet Union. About 1/5 of the force are the most up-to-date MiG-21s. The remainder MiG-15s and MiG-17s. The MiGs are replaced by the Russians as they are lost in the fighting. Intelligence sources estimate there are upward of 2,000 Russian technicians working at air bases and at SAM sites. North Vietnamese pilots are trained in Russia and supervised by Soviet flyers when they return to Hanoi. Within the past few months, the Russians have taught North Vietnamese to man approximately 350 surface-to-air missiles and an estimated 3,000 anti-aircraft guns. Other Soviet advisors help operate North Vietnam's industry, its coal mines, and the port of Haiphong, and are helping in the building or rebuilding of hydroelectric plants and other major works. For the first time, Soviet helicopters are being spotted in North Vietnam. Russian cargo aircraft are also making an appearance. The North Vietnamese war machine runs almost entirely on Russian oil. In the past 18 months, the Russians shipped in 300,000 metric tons. The Chinese provided almost none. Last month alone, the Soviets shipped nearly 25,000 metric tons of gasoline and oil into Haiphong. The Russians used ships to transport 80% of their aid to North Vietnam, the balance going by rail or by plane across Red China, despite several severe restrictions set up by Peking. All told, the Russians are said to be delivering 80,000 tons of goods a month to Hanoi. Intelligence sources in Saigon report that the Soviet ships going to Haiphong carry not only civilian goods, as the Reds insist, but jet aircraft, surface-to-air missiles, radar gear, and anti-aircraft guns. During 1966, an average of one ship a day reached Haiphong. 6 Soviet ships docked there during the past 2 weeks. Tonnage by sea from all sources, Russia, China, East Europe, and non-communist countries, was estimated at 2 million tons in 1966. Of that, the Russian share was estimated at half the total. Red China's about 1/4. Before we can formulate a realistic China policy, therefore, we must recognize that China is not, at the present time, the major factor in continuing the war in Vietnam. As Chinese support dwindles, the Soviets are prepared to enter the gap and Hanoi is eager to accept. We must remember that Hanoi has always taken its inspiration from Moscow. Ho Chi Minh is an old-line Stalinist who receives his revolutionary training in Moscow. Moreover, the North Vietnamese have been traditionally weary of Chinese expansion. It is not startling, then, to find that the Soviets are so deeply involved in North Vietnam that, for all their talk of peace, they could end the insurgents in South Vietnam by simply turning off the spigot. Our policy towards China, therefore, must be guided by the unavoidable factor that the Soviets are still relentless in their pursuit of the goal of world conquest. Before we can begin to take a realistic appraisal of our attitude toward Red China and the uncertainties there, we must face up to the fact that there will never be any peace, either in Vietnam, Asia, or in the whole world, until the Soviet communists renounce their goal of world domination and take some overt action indicating their good faith in doing so. The most important aim of our foreign policy today, therefore, should be to convince the Soviets that they are losing in Vietnam and to demonstrate to them that our will not to be dominated by communism is undaunted and unclouded. Therefore, our clear purpose requires a swift and successful conclusion to the war in Vietnam and a closer look at the probabilities for improved relations from the U.S.-Soviet Consular Treaty. It is not my purpose here either to question or defend the decisions which led to the United States commitment in Vietnam. Since the United States is there, however, it is my view as a senator concerned with armed forces preparedness to see that we should take every step possible to bring the war in Vietnam to a successful conclusion as quickly as is possible. A successful conclusion may mean either an all-out victory on the battlefield, which calls for an unconditional surrender of the insurgent forces in the South, or an honorable negotiated peace settlement based upon the cessation of guerrilla warfare by the Viet Cong and their supporters from the North, which guarantees the security and sovereignty of the people of South Vietnam from foreign domination or from domination by a foreign ideology forced upon them. Ladies and gentlemen, it is true that we are fighting a limited war in Vietnam. It is limited in the sense that we are not seeking any territorial aggrandizement for the United States, and in the sense that we are not attempting to impose our way of life or our system of government upon anyone in that area of the world. There should be no limitations placed, however, on our total commitment to the cause of freedom in Southeast Asia, to the extent that our basic reason for being there, or our will to persevere on freedom's behalf, is open to question or limitations. It would be a mistake to allow self-imposed limitations to so hedge our commitment to the cause of freedom for the people of South Vietnam that we accept the terms of warfare laid down by our enemy and allow ourselves to become bogged down in a land war of attrition. Many years ago, General Douglas MacArthur, whose knowledge of this area of the world and of the rules of warfare are not open to question, warned against United States involvement in a major land war in Asia. His advice is as well taken today as it was then. That is why the United States must take full advantage of its sea and air superiority and wage this war on terms most favorable to us and not allow the communist aggressors to coax us into playing by the ground rules established by them. Nothing would be more acceptable to the communist forces in Southeast Asia than for the United States and its allies to rely solely upon its ground forces in the conduct of the war in Vietnam. The communists are prepared to carry on a virtually endless guerrilla-type action, which has its slack seasons and its hot season, but which they feel would spell eventual success for their cause. The Viet Cong and their mentors in Hanoi are convinced that they won the war against the French in Paris rather than in Vietnam, and they are further convinced that reliance upon the same tactics now would mean eventual victory in Washington. The United States must not play the part of the fly to that spider and be coaxed into the entangling web of a protracted conflict in Vietnam. There are certain steps which the United States can, and I feel must, take in the prosecution of the war. First, we must bomb all the strategic military targets which exist throughout North Vietnam. It is true that prior to the truce, we were bombing in North Vietnam virtually every day, but an indiscriminate use of air power is of little consequence if it is not calculated to eliminate the war-making potential in the North. The question is not one of merely increasing either the scale or the frequency with which the bombing attacks are now being carried out. Rather, it is one of making a most selective choice of targets and concentrating the attacks where it is calculated to do the most damage to our foes. I honestly do not know whether this could be called escalation or not, since it could be done with little or no increase in the intensity of the air raids. It is nevertheless unjustifiable to me and to the men directly involved that we can ask them to risk their lives to damage one span of a relatively innocuous bridge, while other more important targets are left untouched and many times untouchable. Our bombing should be aimed at all obvious military targets, such as airfields, troop concentrations, and military convoys, as well as certain basic industries which are essential to a war effort. These would include petroleum storage dumps, steel mills, cement factories, and power generating facilities, among others. The second essential step which I feel should be taken is to close all the ports in North Vietnam. The most notorious of these is, of course, Haiphong, and we should by all means close it. However, there are others through which supplies and military material are received which should be closed as well. There are three ways in which the ports can be closed: by bombing, by embargoing, or by mining. The weight of military opinion leads toward mining the ports as the most efficient and quickest method available. These two steps, more selective bombing and closing the ports of North Vietnam, would, in my judgment, hasten the conclusion of the war in Vietnam. It is said that at its present rate of prosecution, the war could last as long as 10 years. Every young man in junior high school today could end up in Vietnam. Such a protracted conflict is not necessary if the full impact of the war is brought home to Hanoi. The enemy must be taught that when waging a war like this, a so-called war of national liberation, they are going to be punished. Then and only then will there be any incentive for them to sue for peace or abandon their attempts at conquest. The United States has unquestionably shown the enemy, if it ever needed to, that we have the power to win the war in Vietnam, and yet the enemy persist. Obviously, the enemy is not convinced that the United States has the will to use that power in the manner necessary to bring the war to a successful conclusion. We must convince them that not only do we possess the requisite power, but that we also possess the necessary will. A display of the will is as necessary as a display of the power. The same display of will is necessary in all of our relations with the Soviet Union itself. Let us now turn to the Soviet Consular Treaty and the probable effect it may have upon Soviet-U.S. relations. In the widespread public debate about this treaty, a basic misconception has arisen. That misconception is that there is a need for this treaty. If we look back into history on the matter of consular relations, it will be seen that the very benefits promised by this treaty have already been promised by the Soviets in writing. The Soviets have made no move to fulfill these written promises of protection to American citizens. I do not think, then, that there can be much expectation that the Soviets will abide by this document, instead of strengthening our posture towards the Soviet Union at a time when the Soviets are providing the backbone of supplies in a shooting war against us in Vietnam, we are merely winking at reality and grasping at a mirage. The Secretary of State has said that the basic purpose of this treaty is to afford protection to increasing numbers of American citizens traveling in the Soviet Union. He has pointed out that no treaty is necessary for the President to establish foreign consulates on American soil, that power is already encompassed in the President's constitutional responsibilities for foreign relations. Soviet consulates were established in New York, San Francisco, and Los Angeles in 1937. And an American consulate was established in Vladivostok in 1941. Apparently, then, no new treaty is needed for the resumption of consular relations between the United States and the USSR. On the other hand, no new agreement should be needed for the protection of American citizens traveling in the Soviet Union. We already give Soviet nationals in the United States the advantage of broad democratic rights, including prompt notification to Soviet officials when a Soviet national is arrested. The Soviets ought to do the same thing without a treaty, simply on the basis of reciprocity. The Soviets agreed to recognize such rights in 1933, an agreement they have repeatedly violated down to the most recent weeks. On November the 16th, 1933, Maxim Litvinov and President Roosevelt exchanged memoranda setting forth conditions for the diplomatic recognition of the USSR by the United States. Litvinov at that time was the Soviet Minister of Foreign Affairs. The documents discussed the possible negotiation of a consular convention in which nationals of the United States shall be granted rights with reference to legal protection which shall not be less than those enjoyed in the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics by nationals of the nation most favored in that respect. Even though that treaty was never specifically negotiated, Litvinov promised nevertheless that such rights will be granted to American nationals immediately upon the establishment of relations between our two countries. In other words, the protection would be granted merely upon the condition of diplomatic recognition. What kind of protection did Litvinov promise? Litvinov called Roosevelt's attention to an agreement between the Soviet Union and Germany signed on October the 12th, 1925. American rights would become equal to those of Germany, the most favored nation. The language of this agreement is almost identical to the protective clauses of the 1964 Consular Treaty. And these are a few quotes from that. Each of the contracting parties undertakes to adopt the necessary measures to inform the consul of the other party as soon as possible whenever a national of the country which he represents is arrested in his district. The consul shall be notified either by a communication from the person arrested or by the authorities themselves direct. Such communication shall be made within a period not exceeding 7 times 24 hours, and in large towns, including capitals of districts, within a period not exceeding 3 times 24 hours. In places of detention of all kinds, requests made by consular representatives to visit nationals of that country under arrest or to have them visited by their representatives shall be granted without delay. End quote. President Roosevelt assumed that the protection promised by Litvinov was already in effect when he wrote in formal reply in these words, "Let me add that American diplomatic and consular officers in the Soviet Union will be zealous in guarding the rights of American nationals, particularly the right to a fair, public, and speedy trial, and the right to be represented by a counsel of their choice. We shall expect that the nearest American diplomatic or consular officer shall be notified immediately of any arrest or detention of an American national, and that he shall promptly be afforded the opportunity to communicate and converse with such national." End quote. Moreover, the U.S. State Department itself subsequently treated the agreement on November the 16th, 1933 as a binding agreement. In the official publication, Foreign Relations of the United States, Diplomatic Papers, the Soviet Union, 1933-39, there is recorded extensive diplomatic correspondence over Soviet violations of the November 16, 1933 undertaking. There are 15 items of correspondence in 1937, 18 items in 1938, 16 items in 1939. These documents are available to the public. No one can doubt that the State Department then regarded the right of access to arrested citizens as indisputable. Secretary of State Cordell Hull even held that these rights were inviolable, even if Litvinov had never ever written his memorandum of November the 16th, 1933. Writing to the American ambassador in Moscow in 1937, he instructed him in these words: "You should not, however, say anything that would imply that this letter of Litvinov's is the only basis for this government's request, and you should make it plain, if necessary, that this government would expect the granting of such permission even in the absence of all written guarantees." End quote. But as a matter of fact, the guarantees did exist in writing. Some people might say that all this was a long time ago, and that the Soviets might have changed their attitude in recent years. Yet the 1964 treaty has been signed for 30 months, and there have been 20 cases, I repeat, 20 cases of Americans detained by Soviet police. The best comment upon this situation was provided by Secretary Rusk when he appeared before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee on January the 23rd. And these are his words: "In none of these cases did the Soviet authorities adhere to the standard of notification and access provided for by this convention." I ask then, does this show good faith on the part of the Soviets? I grant that the treaty is not yet in force, but it would not hurt the Soviets to demonstrate their eagerness to abide by its provisions. By adhering to the agreed upon standards even now, the Soviets would not have lost anything. On the contrary, they would have gained a propaganda success. One thinks immediately of the notoriety gained by the Boghorn incident and the Newcomb Mott tragedy. The Secretary of State testified further: "Surely such incidents have serious public impact in this country. Without rules of the kind this convention would provide, the arrest of an individual quickly becomes an international incident." End quote. And well it might. The Soviet Union is obviously not prepared to afford U.S. citizens even the most elementary rights. The main interest of the Soviet Union in negotiating the consular treaty is in securing diplomatic immunity for its consular personnel, an immunity never before granted on such a broad basis. Since 1957 alone, according to FBI statements, 28 Soviet diplomats have been arrested or expelled for crimes, including espionage. This treaty would grant to Soviet charwomen in Soviet consulates the same immunity from prosecution now enjoyed only by recognized diplomatic personnel. No other consular convention has even suggested such a sweeping grant of immunity. Normally, all consulate personnel on U.S. soil have submitted to U.S. criminal law. If Soviet criminal law is so patently unjust that even a foreign consul needs special immunity, then the climate is not yet favorable for the normalization of travel and trade relations which the establishment of consulates implies. The immunity which the Soviets seek in this treaty is not a benefit which it is safe for us to grant. The immunity from prosecution for espionage is the sole aim of the Soviets in negotiating this treaty. Ambassador Foy Kola has testified that this extraordinary proposal for immunity originated from the Soviet side. It was, in fact, the thing they bargained for. This outrageous concession can be foregone by the United States without harm. It is the one thing which the treaty proposes which does not now exist in our consular relationship with the Soviet Union. The immunity provision must be dropped, and without it, the treaty adds no substantive rights which we do not already have as a basis for demanding. The consular treaty with the Soviet Union is merely one phase of the bridge-building efforts of the East, now being actively pursued by the administration. Another link in the chain is that of the expansion of East-West trade activity. The fanciful notions which have resulted in the negotiation of the consular treaty are even more evident in the proposals to expand trade with the Soviet Union and the East European satellites, Once again, a resort to the basic facts would dictate a different response. The total war being waged against democracy and capitalism by the communist world includes as one of its chief elements a war of economics. In 1920, Lenin, the so-called father of communism, told the Soviet Congress that, and I quote, "It is necessary to bribe capitalism with extra profit, and we will get the basics equipment with the aid of which we will strengthen ourselves. We'll finally get on our feet and then defeat it, capitalism, economically." Lenin's statement of 47 years ago is as much the watchword today as it was at that time. The diversified industrial capacity of the United States is unmatched in the world today. It provides the United States with the wherewithal to wage a successful economic war against the forces of world communism. Yet the United States has consistently declined to use this superiority in the continuing struggle against tyranny and proposes now to succumb to the expediency of granting major concessions to the communist world by making available vast amounts of technology and finished products through expanded trade. At the present time, materials considered to be of a strategic nature are not permitted to be shipped to iron-curtain countries. However, year after year, the items classified as strategic are declining in number. More than 400 so-called non-strategic items have thus far been removed from export control by the present administration. One reason for this changing state of affairs is the acceptance of the fiction that the industrial capacity of the Soviet Union is equal to that of the United States and in many areas is not far behind on an overall basis. The Soviet Union and certain United States economic interests have overemphasized the industrial prowess of the communists. Thus, the argument is advanced that many strategic materials are converted into non-strategic items simply because the Soviet Union can produce them themselves, and it would be in the interest of the United States to trade in these items for the economic benefit derived therefrom. The eagerness with which the Soviet Union seeks expanded east-west trade possibilities is an indication of their need for certain basic items. The primary Soviet interest rests in modern machine tools, equipment for their chemical industry, electronic equipment, metallurgical processes, and the engineering know-how of the United States. The Soviet Union still relies heavily on industrial equipment received from the United States during World War II. The technological explosion of the past decade has made modern industry more dependent than ever on ultra-precision and on instruments capable of assuring such precision, on rigid standards of quality control, on sophistication of design, and painstaking workmanship. These are precisely the areas in which the Soviet Union is weakest and where the Soviet system itself raises the greatest obstacles to progress. If the Soviet Union is allowed to import our technological progress, the United States will have saved them billions of dollars they would have otherwise have to spend in basic research. This is assuming that they are capable of conducting this research. Not only is the Soviet Union seriously lacking in industrial know-how, but her agricultural technology suffers even more in comparison with that of the United States. In the past, the United States has bailed out the Soviet Union in food crises. A major concern of the communist bloc is to supply its people with an adequate diet with a minimum number of farm laborers. The lack of mechanization on the farms in the Soviet Union, which requires them to devote more of their people to the production of food, also has the effect of depriving them of this labor in industrial capacities. It is pure fancy to assume that expanded trade with the Soviet Union will result in a moderation on their part in their quest for world domination. On the contrary, such trade will assist them to realize that objective. The controversy over the expansion of East-West trade has created a sharp division in the ranks of organized labor in the United States. I am pleased to note that some of the most outstanding labor leaders of this country have the vision to see the danger inherent in such trade. There is no question but that trading with the communists is to their benefit, far more than it could ever be to the benefit of the free world. The fundamental mistake we have made in China, in Vietnam, and with the Soviet Union is that we have acted upon the vain hope that the only evil in communism is its proclivity towards violence. Under this doctrine, we have hoped that communist violence would soften and fade away as communist nations become more sophisticated, wealthier, and more deeply concerned with the pleasures of a higher standard of living. Unfortunately, violence is only the byproduct, not the cause of evil in communism. Indeed, violence and aggression have in the past come from some of the most advanced and cultured states. The evil in communism comes from the suppression of human liberty and its denial of the existence of God, who is the author of freedom for mankind. In its zeal for world conquest, communism is equally insistent upon the suppression of human liberty. Communism will never abandon its perverse goal of world domination as long as those who live in freedom make no move of opposition. Thank you very much.
And we'll try to call on you. Make your question as concise as possible. That way more questions will be able to be asked. Yes, sir.
If you point to whoever
Fine.
you want to. Now, I might say this in the beginning, that I'll be glad to try to answer your questions if I can. There may be some questions that have classification that I couldn't go into on details. There may be some military information I could not go into, but I will go as far as I can without violating classified material. I'm very glad to be here and be with you. I'm not here to argue with you. You have a right to your opinion. I have a right to mine. That's the great virtue of living in America. I shall be pleased to answer anything I can. I might say in the beginning, because frequently speaking at colleges in different parts of the country, the news media in many instances have misportrayed my position on the race question. I'd like to make that clear in the beginning. And then I don't think it's necessary to take a lot of your time on that question. I'm in favor of equal rights for all people, regardless of race. I'm in favor of equal educational opportunities, equal economic opportunities, and equal political opportunities. In my state, I might say that we admit any child in a school who wants to go. I want to be frank with you. I do not agree with the guidelines of the HEW now, because they would violate the decision of 1954. The Supreme Court decision of 1954 held that no child could be discriminated against and could go to any school he wanted to. Well, if you follow the HEW guidelines, they do just the opposite. They want to, in order to bring about mixing, they want to take children against their will and force them into another school. That's the very thing the Supreme Court said you couldn't do. And so I just wanted to make, I'm not in favor of doing that. I'm in favor of as much freedom as possible. If any child can go to any school he wants to, what more can you ask than that? I think it's a fair decision, and my state is doing that. In fact, I guess most of the states are now too. And it's not just in the South, but other parts of the country. There's a tremendous revulsion in New York City of trying to pick children up in buses and haul them completely across the city just to bring about a social mixing. Now, on the race question, I've frequently been very distorted on that, because I ran for president in 1948 on the states' rights ticket. And so I just want to make that statement to you. I thought it'd save a lot of your time and a lot of your questions. And you may wish to get into the foreign affairs question. You may wish to get into military preparedness. You may wish to discuss the Vietnam War. You may wish to discuss the Consular Treaty Fall. So now if you...
Sir, loud and clear so everyone can hear you.
In your talk, you mentioned that the Soviet Union is supporting the North Vietnamese to the extent of about $800 million a year, and that at another point you said without the support, the war effort on the other side would probably collapse very shortly. If the U.S. government were to reduce its support from the something like $30 billion a year it is now to only that $800 million, how long do you think the Saigon regime would last?
Well, this is not a fight. This is not a fight there between the North and the South. This is a fight between the communists on one side and the free world on the other. The war in Vietnam, I do not view it, and I was over there in December, I do not view it possibly as some people do, as just a war between one section of the country against another. This is another effort by the communists in their goal of world domination. This is another battle in their effort to take over the world. And therefore, as much money as we have to put into it to win, I'm in favor of doing it.
Answer the question.
Yes, sir.
You mentioned a few days ago that you felt that one of the possible theories for the Kennedy assassination was a communist plot. Could you go into this in more detail?
Well, I just said that offhand in a speech in Texas night before last. And I didn't realize it'd make the paper. It seemed to have made headlines. I simply gave my opinion. I've studied communism for a number of years now. I've given very intensive study to communism. And I've studied this case considerably. And I've studied the background of the people involved and so forth. And my personal opinion is that it was not just a one-man operation, but was a communist plot. That's my opinion.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Could you stand up and speak loud?
Yeah, just recently Barry Goldwater was quoted in the LA Times as saying that he had more regard for one American life than he did for the whole city of Illinois. Do you think that's a responsible statement, and do you think that it's a statement that influences the peace, the nations, and the world?
Well, I'm not here to comment on what Barry Goldwater says. If you ask me my opinion, I'll give you my opinion on something, but I'm not here to comment on it.
What's your opinion?
Well, I'm in favor of saving every life I can over that. And my judgment is if you fight the war with all the power we've got and wind it up quickly, you save a lot of lives on both sides. And I like to see lives saved on both sides as much as possible.
Rick?
Senator, could you please tell us what the situation is with your seniority in terms of the Republican Party and your two committees? As I understand it, there was something of a problem with Senator Javits a while ago. Has the seniority situation been worked out on the Republican side as far as you're concerned? Have you gotten the seniority?
Yes, I think so. I'm on the Armed Services Committee. I'm next to Margaret T. Smith on the Republican side. She's a ranking member of the Armed Services Committee on the Republican side. I'm next to her, next to Senator Miller of Iowa, and then Senator Howard of Texas, and then somebody else was added this year, Senator Dominic, I believe, of Colorado.
Are you satisfied with your seniority on the
Yes, I'm satisfied with it. I ranked about 13th on the Republican side and ranked number 40 in the Senate. I was added to the Judiciary Committee this year. Senator Javits went to the Appropriations Committee. I first applied to the Appropriations Committee myself, but he had been on the Appropriations Committee before that. And so he had a prior claim on that. But he'd been on the IB before I became a Republican. And so as soon as I found out that he was applying, I didn't push my claim forward. He later said something about he might consider trading back with me, but I told him I was satisfied the way it was. So.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'd like to find out your opinion, Senator, on one Mr. Beckwith deciding to run for the lieutenant governorship of Mississippi. Supposedly he's accused of assassinating Medgar Evers. I was wondering what your opinion was on him deciding to run for the lieutenant governorship of that state.
I ain't got a thing to do with this running. This is a free country, and any man can run for any office he wants to.
I know you haven't got a thing to do with it, but I have an opinion on it, and I was wondering if you did.
Any man who wants to run for an office in this country is free to run.
But there's equal rights for everybody, huh? Okay.
I believe in equal rights. I certainly do.
Yes,
I
ma'am.
believe in equal rights for everybody.
Senator, in your speech, you said that you seemed critical of the administration for not encouraging and supporting the opposition to Chairman Mao. By this, did you mean that you thought
I didn't.
Free China, or exactly what you were doing?
No, I think that we ought to lend out hope to the people of China. I'm a great believer that the people in the various countries of the world have good intentions and mean well and want freedom. I think the people of Russia are just fine people. I think the people of Hungary and Romania and Poland, Czechoslovakia and Bulgaria and Cuba, I think they're good people, but they're dominated by communist leaders. They're controlled by the police and by the army. Otherwise, if they could throw their yoke off, I'm sure they would do it. And I think we ought to hold out hope to the people behind the Iron Curtain, wherever they are, whether it's China or elsewhere, that the United States wants to see them free. and that in such a way as we can, we will encourage that and promote that in every way possible.
But you weren't actually encouraging the opposition to Chairman
No,
Mao.
no. The opposition to Mao there, I believe, comes from the Soviets, doesn't it?
I don't believe so, no, sir. I think it's a civil war.
You think it's a civil war? Well, it is a civil war, but the Soviets, so I've been informed, are sympathetic to Mao's opposition. I believe that's pretty clear on that point, isn't it?
Well, there's no Soviet aid.
How do you know?
I'd like to ask your opinion on this bombing of strategic bases a little more. First, I'd like to know why, if the United States isn't bombing strategic bases, strategic plants or facilities, it's not. And also, if this bombing involves bombing civilian populations in the course of bombing strategic locations, are you in favor of that?
Well, we are in a war now, and I'm in favor of doing everything necessary to win it as quickly as possible and save lives. Now, if I would if I had the power of decision on that, I would do this. I would notify North Vietnam, the government leaders, and the people that we in this war to win, we're going to win it, and we're putting on notice now that we're going to bomb every military and every strategic location in North Vietnam to bring the war to a close, because I'm confident that would have to bring it to a close very quickly. And that would give the civilians the opportunity to move out. Now, no one wants to kill civilians, but a civilian life is just like a soldier's life. It's a life lost. I don't know that a civilian's life is any more precious than a soldier's life. I fought in World War II, and I thought as much of my life, I think, as civilians did over there theirs. We don't want to see anybody killed. But I'm firmly convinced that you've got to put the pressure on North Vietnam so strong and destroy their potential to make war in order to bring this war to a close. And if you do that, then they're going to convey the word to the Soviets that we just can't take it any longer. And when they do that, the Soviets will call it off. The Soviets can call off this war tomorrow if they want to do it.
Yes, sir.
Yes, regarding
Excuse me. Could you stand up, especially because where you are?
regarding your theory of holding out hope to the people in communist countries, one thing that was proven in Hungary was that people can fight tanks with rakes and rocks. What do you propose to do if we hold out hope and the people are inspired by this and rise up against the communists? Should we intervene, or should we just let them be slaughtered again? What do you think we should do?
Well, if we had moved way back there at the propitious moment, I doubt very much that the Soviets was going in there. But we hesitated for 48 hours, and they saw we were not going to take a move, so they moved. Sooner or later, you may have to have an organization of the free world that will really stand together. Right now, we have the United Nations. You've got the communists there and the anti-communists, and of course, as you know, it hadn't been too effective. It may have relieved some tensions at times. At least it's a platform on which opinions can be expressed and steam can be let off at times by different nations. But I think we ought to let the people behind the Iron Curtain know that we're sympathetic to them. We ought not to hold out any hope to encourage them to rise up when we know they get slaughtered. But the propitious time may come when we can be of help to them. And if we had not sent so much foreign aid to Yugoslavia, Tito would have crumbled before now. We have given between $4 and $6 billions of dollars, billions, not millions, billions of dollars to that country. The people of that country have not realized that we have helped them to any extent. The communists have used that to promote their own goals. We sent wheat to Poland because we were told that people there were hungry and starving. The communist government took the wheat and put it in their own bags with the government label and not the American label at all. The people never knew the wheat came from America. We sold wheat to Russia just a few years ago to make a few paltry dollars, it seems, to make some profit out of the transaction. Food, clothing, and armor are tools of war. And any time you furnish the deficiency of a communist nation what he needs, and they needed wheat, then are you helping, I think, to keep the people behind the Iron Curtain. Now, when we furnish the wheat there, we enable them to keep more men in their gun factories and their missile factories because they would have had to take out thousands of men, put them on the farms to grow more food. That's one great difficulty the communist countries have, is producing enough food for their own people. And in my judgment, it was a mistake to sell wheat to the communists. It's a mistake to trade with them. You only help. They are not going to take any move. They're not going to take any action unless it's to their benefit. And if they wanted to buy that wheat, that shows they needed it badly. And I think it was a mistake to sell it to them because it took them off the hook, so to speak. Now the other thing is, and you may not know this, we not only sold the communists the wheat, but we guaranteed repayment of the loan to the bankers who loaned the Russians the money to buy the wheat. Now why should we guarantee repayment of a loan that's made by our enemies to a banker to buy the very thing they need to keep their government alive? We've been entirely too sympathetic with them. The whole policy, and of course some people don't agree with me on this because I'm a strong anti-communist. I take a very forthright position on these matters and speak out on them. I'm firmly convinced we made the first mistake over there in the Asian world was letting China go down the drain. The report was that there was corruption in Chiang Kai-shek's regime. Therefore, we would have to cut off aid, and we cut off aid, and Chiang Kai-shek went down the drain. The communists came in. We knew that would happen. If we didn't, we certainly should have known it would happen if we did that. The next thing we did, the communists started the war in Korea, and they didn't think that we'd come back in there. Mr. Atchison made the unfortunate statement that no longer has the United States an interest in this part of the world. So acting on that, I presume, they came in. Originally, and you may not know this, and you ought to know this too, Korea was divided into two parts for one purpose only. That was to take the surrender of arms at the end of World War II. The communists were going to take the surrender of the arms above the 38th parallel and the United States below the 38th parallel, or the free world. And once the communists got in North Korea, they wouldn't move out. And we moved out. We acted in good faith, took the surrender and moved out. They remained there. And that's the reason that Korea was divided. And so we had to go back and fight the war in Korea. Then we made a mistake in not winning the war in Korea. We could have won the war there. We should have won the war there. If we had won the war in Korea, we wouldn't be having the trouble today we're having in Vietnam. The communist goal is to take the world. They're going to keep on keeping on until they take the world, unless the United States stops them. This is the only country in the world that's powerful enough to stop the communists. Now, some of these days, the people who really will study this question like I've tried to do, I believe are going to be convinced of the real purpose and motive of the communists. They're not like other countries. If we could trade with them and make good friends out of them, nothing I would like to see better. But you can't deal with them like that. It reminds me of the story of the hunter and the bear. This hunter went out in the woods to shoot, and a big white bear rose up and raised his paws. And the hunter raised his gun and started to crack down. And the bear says, "Wait a minute, don't shoot, we can negotiate, we can talk this thing out." And as they approached each other, why, the bear says, "All I want is a full stomach." The hunter says, "All I want is a fur coat." And the bear says, "Well, let's sit down here and talk about this thing and negotiate, we can work it out." So they sat down for about 45 minutes. And the bear got up and walked away alone. The bear had his stomach full, and the hunter had his fur coat.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, over there.
Now that's about as much as you can trust the communists. You just can't trust them. They have broken, according to the American Bar Association, they have broken 50 out of 52 major agreements they've entered into. They've broken hundreds of other agreements. The Defense Department put out a pamphlet a few years ago listing the agreement and told how it had been broken and when it was broken and all about it. There was such a demand for those pamphlets, I think the Defense Department quit publishing them. But they did put it out, and I used it on several occasions to show how the communists broke their agreement. They would say anything, they would do anything to accomplish their purpose. Lying, cheating, stealing, murder, anything to take the world.
Yes, sir.
Well, I hope not.
Senator Thurmond, I think that most of us, at least in Western civilization, can agree that we're very much against the oppression of liberty, and this makes most of us against tyranny by proclivity of our ethical liberty and all this stuff. But to say that the worst thing about communism is its oppression of liberty, and not its violence, etc. agree that if the Russians were going to invade another country, and that country asked for our aid, that would be quite legitimate and going to aid them. We don't want to see another country put under the domination of another one. But if there is an upheaval in a country by itself, an internal upheaval, it doesn't seem to me that we're justified on your grounds of feeling that because communism, oppresses liberty, that we should go in there immediately. What you're going to have us doing eventually is being all over the damn world. And on this kind of conclusion, it doesn't seem to follow at all. Because if we're in there having all these wars, it seems to be we're oppressing these people just as much. You're going to have us all over the world. It seems the real movement in the world is the United States everywhere, and not the Russians anyplace.
Well, it wouldn't have been necessary for us to go into Vietnam. It wouldn't have been necessary for us to go in the Dominican Republic. It wouldn't have been necessary for us to go in Lebanon. It wouldn't have been necessary for us to go in Greece. It wouldn't have been necessary for us to go in Turkey and other places if the Russians didn't have the goal of world domination. Now, in order to bring about peace in the world, there's only a simple thing has to be done. If the communists will renounce that goal of world domination and abide by it, we can have peace in the world. Secondly, the United States is not an aggressor country. We don't want any land of other countries, and we don't want any property of other peoples. But the goal of the communists is just what Lenin said in 1917 when he took over Russia. And here's what he said. He said the aim of the Soviets is to be the grave diggers, the heirs and successors to the governments of the world. In other words, their goal was to destroy existing governments, to take over and succeed them. In Russia today, as you well know, the people don't determine which children can go to grammar school. The parents don't determine which children can go to high school or which can go to college. The parents and the child doesn't determine what course they're going to take, where they're going to live, or what salary they're going to make. Every major decision in Russia today, behind the Iron Curtain, is made by the government leaders. The people own no property except some little personal property that they've saved up for. They can't own a home, they can't own a farm, they can't own a factory. They are depriving the people of their freedom. And how anyone can sympathize with Russia in her aspirations of world domination to take over this world and the way she has treated her own people as she has. Only last year we passed a resolution through the Senate at the suggestion of Senator Abraham Ribakov, who is a Jew. And he wanted us to pass it, and I joined him and was glad to do it, to condemn Russia. To condemn Russia for persecuting the Jews over there. Well, they don't hesitate to persecute anybody who disagrees with them. And furthermore, they not only persecute them, they'll cut their heads off. And so, as far as I'm concerned, I'm proud to live in this country where our people receive the largest wages. They have the best homes and the best fed clothed people of any in the world. No people in the world have the opportunities and the advantages we have here. In this country, our wages are 3 times higher than they are in Great Britain or Western Germany, the 2 most advanced nations in Europe. They're 5 times higher than they are in France. They're 6 times higher than they are in Italy. In this country, a man works only 1/7 as long to make a loaf of bread as he does in Russia. He works only 1/10 as long to buy a cotton shirt. He works only 1/12 as long to buy a suit of clothes as he does in Russia. In this country, our people have between in this country, our people have between 300 and 400 televisions for every 1,000 people. They have between 400 and 500 telephones for every 1,000 people. We have 900 radios. You don't want to hear it because it's the truth. You don't want to hear it because it's the truth and it's hurting you. You don't want to hear America compared with Russia. I'm showing you where America is the greatest nation on the face of the earth, and Russia can't compare with it.
Right here.
Is that America? You're proud of that?
Yes, sir.
Senator, I'm sorry for these people who seem to be rude. I know most of us disagree with you, but I think you should be given the chance to speak. And communism, in a sense, is a monolithic voice in that all communism is bad, and there is no gray or white or in between or anything else. Now, don't you think that by pushing the communists together, by our bombing in Hanoi, you say that if we stop we bomb the targets in Hanoi more effectively, we bomb the military installation, the war is going to come to an end, Russia will back down. Now, the fact of the matter is, whether you realize or not, we are in Russia's part of the world, so to speak. This is Southeast Asia. We are in foreign ground. Okay, now, how can you expect the Russians to back down at their back door? As I see it, if we push the war there to the point that you want it pushed, we are directly facing the prospect of World War III and a direct confrontation with Russia.
I don't think so personally. My judgment is that Russia would not come into the war. She would not run the risk of jeopardizing the mainland of Russia and her people by going to the aid down there of the Vietnamese to the extent you think.
Well, in the sense that if the war remains conventional, without nuclear weapons, I don't see how we could win a land war in Asia if Russia was to decide to come in. The only way we could defeat the Russians in Vietnam would be the use of nuclear weapons. Now, how would you stop?
I don't think we ought to go in for a land war. That's the reason I'm in favor now of bombing to alleviate this land war. My opinion is that if we will bomb in the key military targets, and if we will close the ports and cut off enemy supplies, then we can bring this war to a hasty conclusion. And that will save lives in the end. After all, there's only one simple thing Russia's got to do. I'll repeat it. If she will renounce her goal of world domination in good faith and act by it, the world can live in peace.
Yes, sir.
I think your story about the big white bear was particularly young. But concerning your hope to oppress people of the world, what do you think? Do you think this hope should extend to the black people of Africa? And if so, supposing that Russia would also offer this hope, then what would the position of the United States be if the black Africans went to the Russians? The hope seemed the better.
Well, I'm in favor of equal opportunities for all people, regardless of where they live. I think the people in each country have a right to their own determination, and if the people in any country want a communist government, I think it's their business. If they want a non-communist government, it's their business. But I don't think that the people of any country, it's just my opinion, that they're not going to choose a government of tyranny as exists in Russia and as they want to spread throughout the world, if they have their free choice.
Yes, sir, in the back.
You mentioned Russian goal of world domination and cited treaty violations. I was wondering if you consider the University of Wisconsin Graduate School of Physical Science comments infiltrated, because in 1962 they showed that France, Great Britain, the United States, and the Soviet Union ran 1, 2, 3, 4 the numbers of treaty violations since World War II. The Soviet Union was rather poor for.
I don't know of any treaty violations by the United States. I'd like to see that. It's possible we have violated some. I wouldn't try to defend the State Department on everything. In fact, I don't agree with the State Department on a lot of things. But I'd like to see the list you were talking about.
Yes, sir.
I can't understand one contradiction. If Russia is a monolithic power devoted to the subversion and to fight and to destroy everywhere, on the one hand, hopeless, beyond saving or negotiating with, but on the other hand, you are assured that they will not call our bluff in their sphere of influence the way we did theirs in Cuba. Now, which are they? Are they an irremediable, implacable foe, or are they an impotent, frightened adversary who's going to back down?
I don't think they'll call our bluff over there, because every time we have called our bluff, they have backed down.
That's been in our part of the world.
No, Greece and Turkey is not in our part of the world.
Well, it's European.
Lebanon is in our part of the world.
Yes, yes, sir.
Senator, are you a Christian?
Well, I try to be.
How can you support killing when the one most prime teaching of Jesus Christ is to love thy enemy?
That's the reason I want to win this war and wind it up and stay at peace.
Yes, sir, right here.
What senators are advocating the consular treaty?
Advocating the consular treaty? Well, the administration is advocating the consular treaty. And the moment the administration takes a stand, a big block of senators immediately will go that way. I'd say about a third. At the moment, probably 40% now because the Senate is 2-1 Democratic. So I'd say about around 40% generally the moment they take a stand. So you get most of the Democrats who will go along. There'll be some that won't, and there'll be some Republicans who won't. Their only hope of stopping this treaty is that they can't get 2/3 to confirm it. Now, they would have pushed it through last year, but we aroused sentiment against it last year and were able to stop it. But they're really putting the heat on this year. I know of people that the conferences have been held with that were against it last year, and they're trying to win them over in one way or another. I hope they will not be able to do it. Again, I say there's nothing to be gained by us. We've got it in writing now, the same protection the treaty gives. The only thing the treaty gives, and this is what Russia wants, she wants immunity for the employees at the consulate.
Yes, sir, right there.
Mr. Senator.
Senator, I'd like to join with you in saying that we should respect all human rights in South Vietnam. However, I think we also have an obligation in South Carolina. And I'd like you to explain on the 1957, the 1960, the 1964, 65, and 66 Civil Rights Act.
Yes. In 1957, I spoke for 24 hours and 18 minutes against the so-called. I'll tell you why I did it. Because I believe in the Constitution. The Constitution says if a man is charged with a crime, he's entitled to a trial by jury. And this 1957 law that was passed provided that if your punishment is more than $300 and more than 45 days, you'd get a trial by jury. If it was less than that, you wouldn't. The Constitution made no such exception. I believe in the right of trial by jury. That's the reason I spoke against it. And someday, if you are charged with a crime and you don't have a trial by jury, I believe you'll take the same position I did.
Yes, sir.
Senator,
Or what else you want to ask about?
Well,
Yes,
as long as we're talking about trial by jury, the 1966 Civil Rights Act provided for integrated juries. Now, if a jury is to be a jury by your peers, it must be integrated. Yet you voted against this act also, directly contradicting what you just said.
Oh, you don't have to have them integrated. They're integrated in my state already.
Are you concerned about the justice
The
in
schools in
Alabama
my
and
state
Mississippi?
integrated, the juries integrated. I don't know. I don't know. Now, you haven't been there. You don't know. Oh, you go down there and show me now where people are not getting justice in my state, then I'll listen to you.
Well, I've been there.
I've heard these talks. I've heard these talks to people all over the country. Along that line. I've heard these talks about that. And some social reformers have been in there. Some on payroll. Some on the payroll of organizations have gone in there and tried to stir up strife. A few years ago, there was a question about people voting in McCormick County. They had only a small number of Negroes registered. And the federal government sent the FBI in there. And they stayed for months trying to find somebody that said that he wasn't allowed to register. And they couldn't come up with a single case. Even the Civil Rights Commission couldn't come up with a single case in my state. I don't say my state's perfect. I know it's not. And California's not perfect. And New York's not perfect. And no state is perfect. But I say this, that no state has made a more desperate effort to try to equalize opportunities and help its people than South Carolina.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Senator, would you be willing, after this big communist threat is finished, to help human rights in this country and human dignity? After the big problem of the communist threat is finished, or do you consider human rights in this country to be a communist threat?
I've already explained my position on equal rights and opportunities.
We'll have time for 2 more questions, please. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, Senator, you talk about peace. What is our government doing to help the economy or plan for a peaceful economy? What will happen?
In Vietnam?
No, in the United States, if we ever do end the war.
What is the government doing for the economy here?
What is the government doing to try to turn over to a peaceful economy if we ever stop the war in Vietnam?
Well, you've raised an interesting question because I agree with you that the economy to a certain extent is supported by the war effort. I agree with you on that because defense establishments throughout the nation undoubtedly have spurred the economy here. Of course, at the moment, we do have less employment than we've ever had in the nation. We have the largest per capita income we've ever had in the nation. We have the largest gross national product, over $700 billion a year that we've ever had in the nation. and the standard of living is higher than it's ever been in the nation, and some of it undoubtedly is due to the fact that the wall plants are running full blast and there's such a demand for goods. And if and when the wall levels off or when it's ended, and I hope that won't be long, then of course the government will have to make plans for a peaceful economy. And I'm sure a great many states are doing that already. In our state, incidentally, I might say that we're gaining a lot of industry in my state, and we don't have enough people. We can use more skilled people there. We can use more unskilled people there. We honestly need bodies. We need people to work. We've got jobs going wanting in textile mills. We've got them in electronics plants. We've got them in various other plants in South Carolina. We can't get enough people. So if you know of anybody who wants a job and doesn't have one, you send them to my state.
This will be the last question. Yes, sir.
Senator, you've spoken about lying, cheating, and murder and war crimes, and you speak of the will to win, to do whatever we have to do in order to win. Well, it seems to me that I've heard that story before about the triumph of the will. I wonder how you would distinguish between the war crimes that the Nazis committed against the National Liberation Front in a place called Lidice, Czechoslovakia, and the sort of things that we're doing in North and South Vietnam today.
Well, there they were bringing tyranny to the people, and they killed innocent people. Here, the United States is fighting to preserve freedom for the world. That's the difference. The United States is trying to preserve the freedom for the people of this country, because our very national interest itself is at stake in this war. As I said before, in my judgment, this is not a war between the North and South. This is a war between the communists and the free world. And I think anything we can do to win this war and bring it to a close and help all of Vietnam preserve freedom, it will certainly be to the advantage of the world.
Thank you very much.